Hey everyone! Today we are setting the stage for an absolutely incredible story. It's a story of unexpected crisis, deep despair, and ultimately a total masterclass in faith and true leadership. Now, to understand exactly where we are right now, we really need to know that David is currently an outcast. He's on the run from King Saul, and he's actually been living in Philistine territory just to stay safe. So he and his men are heading back to their families after being sent away from this major Philistine battle. And what they think is going to be a peaceful, quiet return home is about to turn into an unimaginable nightmare. We're going to go verse by verse through this deeply human story about what we do when we hit absolute rock bottom, and how a totally chance encounter out in the desert changes literally everything.
Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Prophets Samuel 1, chapter 30 in a clear and simple way, step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this. First, we'll look at the crisis at Ziklag. Second, seeking the Lord's guidance. Third, pursuit and the Egyptian. Fourth, victory and the spoil. And finally, lessons on our chapter recap.
Section 1. The crisis at Ziklag. Return to despair.
To really understand the gravity of what's happening here, you have to imagine walking into an absolute nightmare. I mean, David and his men have been marching for days. Verse 1 tells us that they finally reached their home, Ziklag, on the third day. But when they arrive, they find the city completely destroyed by fire. The first few verses paint a scene of just total, crushing despair. According to verse 2, all the women and everyone else in it, both young and old, had been taken captive. Verse 3 makes the heartbreak really vivid. David and his men come to the city and find it burned to the ground. Their wives, their sons, and their daughters are just gone, taken away. In fact, verse 5 explicitly mentions the kidnapping of David's own two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. The reaction? It's visceral. Verse 4 tells us that David and the troops with him wept aloud until they literally had no physical strength left to weep. The toll of that grief just totally overtakes them. And then, in verse 6, we see how incredibly fast the situation devolves. In their bitter, blinding grief over losing their kids, David's own loyal men, his closest friends, actually turn on him. They start talking about stoning him to death.
Let's clarify exactly what happens to their home. Ziklag was David's base city. It was given to him while he was seeking refuge in Philistine territory. Well, while he and his army were away, a nomadic group called the Amalekites raided the Negev, and they attacked Ziklag. But verse 2 gives us a really vital piece of information. It actually serves as this tiny, vital spark of hope amidst all the despair. The Amalekites took everyone captive, but they didn't actually kill anyone. They just carried them off and went on their way. The fact that their families are still alive means all is not lost. This specific detail sets the stage perfectly for a desperate rescue mission.
Section 2. Seeking the Lord's guidance, David's face.
So David is at his absolute lowest point, right? His city is burned, his family is kidnapped, and his own grieving men are literally threatening to execute him. Now, most leaders would completely panic here, or maybe lash out. But the second half of verse 6 tells us something incredibly profound. It says, David found his strength in the Lord his God. Instead of reacting in fear or anger, he immediately pivots. He seeks divine direction. In verse 7, David calls upon Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech. He clearly instructs Abiathar, bring me the ephod, and Abiathar brings it to him. Now, you might be wondering, what is an ephod? Well, it was a special priestly garment. In the context of the Hebrew Bible, the high priest used it to consult the Lord directly. It was how they received divine guidance during times of national crisis or, critical life or death decisions like this one.
With the ephod brought forward, verse 8 shows David asking God two very clear, very direct questions. Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them? And God's response? It's immediate, it's definitive, and it's absolute. He answers, pursue them. You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue. Notice the psychological shift here. God doesn't just give a vague promise. He gives a rock-solid guarantee of total success. For a grieving leader who is actively facing a mutiny, this absolute certainty is exactly what David needs to mobilize his men. His deep despair is instantly transformed into fierce, focused action.
Section 3, Pursuit and the Egyptian. The journey begins.
The energy completely shifts right here. David and his 600 men immediately march out, literally racing against time to track down these Amalekite raiders. So the crucial point is that they don't all make it to the battlefield. The men march incredibly hard until they reach the Bezer ravine. Verses 9 and 10 tell us the physical reality of their grief combined with this rapid march. 200 of David's men were simply too exhausted to cross the ravine. Remember, they had been weeping until they couldn't weep anymore, and then marching until their bodies literally gave out. They just had nothing left in the tank. So David has to leave them behind with the heavy supplies. He takes the remaining 400 men and continues the pursuit. Just think about the sheer desperation here. He's now heading into enemy territory, and his forces have been cut by a whole third.
And then, out in a field, verses 11 through 15 walk us step by step through a truly remarkable chance encounter. They stumble upon a man, an Egyptian. First, they find him starving and severely dehydrated. He hasn't had food or water for 3 days and 3 nights. But instead of ignoring him in their mad rush to save their families, David's men actually stop. They give him water, a piece of pressed figs, and 2 cakes of raisins. Once his spirit is revived, David asks him directly, "Who do you belong to? Where do you come from?" The man reveals he's an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite. His master had abandoned him in the desert 3 days ago simply because he fell ill. I mean, think about that cruelty for a second, just left to die in the harsh desert over a simple illness. The Egyptian also confirms that his group were indeed the ones who raided the Negev, the territory of Judah, Caleb, and yes, they were the ones who burned Ziklag. David asks if he can lead them to the raiding party. In verse 15, the slave agrees, but only after making David swear a strict oath. He says, "Swear to me by God that you will not kill me or hand me over to my master." This perfectly contrasts the cruelty of the Amalekite master with David's inherent mercy. This one small act of kindness to a vulnerable, abandoned slave provides the massive breakthrough David desperately needed to find that camp.
Section 4. Victory and the spoil. The battle and the dispute. So the Egyptian slave stays true to his word and leads David right down to the Amalekite camp. Verse 16 paints a vivid, chaotic picture of the scene. When David finds them, they're scattered all over the countryside. They're eating, they're drinking, and they're just reveling because of the massive amount of plunder they had taken from the Philistines and from Judah. They are completely off guard, basically just busy partying. Verse 17 tells us David struck them down from dusk until the evening of the next day. It was a long, sweeping, and total victory. Only 400 young Amalekite men managed to escape by riding off on their camels. And, exactly as God promised when David consulted the ephod, the rescue was a complete success. Let's look closely at verses 18 and 19. David recovered absolutely everything the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nothing was missing. Young or old, boy or girl, wives, plunder, David brought every bit of it back. Verse 20 details that they also took all the Amalekite flocks and herds, driving them ahead of the other livestock and declaring, "This is David's plunder." But then, we reach verse 21. David and his 400 fighters return to the Besser ravine, right where the 200 exhausted men had stayed behind to guard the supplies. The 200 come out to meet David and the troops, and David greets them warmly. But an internal conflict instantly erupts. Verse 22 introduces us to the evil men and troublemakers among David's followers. These men step forward with a very harsh proposal. They argue, "Because they did not go out with us, we will not share with them the plunder we recovered. However, each man may take his wife and children and go." Basically, they believed that because those 200 guys didn't physically fight on the front lines, they had completely forfeited any right to the reward, beyond just getting their families back. Well, David completely shuts us down. In verses 23 and 24, he replies, "No, my brothers, you must not do that with what the Lord has given us." He explains exactly why he's ruling this way. It was the Lord who protected them and handed the raiding party over to them. By acknowledging God's hand in the victory, David totally removes the ego from his frontline fighters. He insists that the plunder belongs to God's providence, not just their physical strength. He declares the share of the man who stayed with the supplies is to be the same as that of him who went down to the battle. All shall share alike. And this brilliantly illustrates David's leadership. Verse 25 is crucial because it shows the historical significance of this moment. David didn't just apply this rule to this specific day at the Besor ravine. He made it a binding statute and an ordinance for all of Israel from that day forward. It permanently established a principle of equity, that everyone in the community plays a vital, valuable role. Section 5. Lessons and Chapter Recap. Sharing the Blessing. The battle is over, the families are finally safe, and the internal dispute has been settled with true justice. But as we look at the end of the chapter, from verse 26 through 31, we see David isn't quite done distributing all that recovered wealth. When he arrives back at Ziklag, he doesn't just hoard the vast amount of livestock and wealth they captured. Instead, he takes a portion of the plunder and sends it as presents to the elders of Judah, his friends. He sends gifts out across the region to places like Bethel, Ramoth Negev, Jatir, Aruir, Sifmoth, Eshtemoa, Hebron, and all the places where he and his men had previously roamed. Now, this is a move of absolute strategic brilliance. Remember, David is currently an outcast fleeing from King Saul. By sharing this massive blessing with the elders of Judah, he is actively cementing vital political alliances and proving his capability as a protector of Israel. He is literally laying the groundwork for his future kingship.
So, what do we actually take away from our verse-by-verse look at Prophet Samuel 1, chapter 30? First, when you are at your absolute lowest, facing deep despair and even betrayal, find your strength in God. Seek His guidance before acting on raw emotion. Second, show kindness to the vulnerable. Think about it. If David's men hadn't stopped to feed a dying, abandoned Egyptian slave, they never would have found their families. That small act of mercy opened the door to total victory. And third, true leaders recognize that success is a shared blessing provided by God, not just an individual trophy. Which leaves us with a really provocative question to think about. If you were one of those 400 men who fought from dusk till dawn, would you have had the grace and humility to share your hard-earned reward with those who are just too weak to fight?
Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.